Welcome to episode 4 in the wall unit build series. In this episode, I'll cover the top half of the wall unit, so that will contain 3 separate sections of shelving and cupboards, and also some downlights that I installed that will be activated by a motion sensor. Be sure to check out the rest of the series for the bottom half of the unit, so that will contain the liquor cabinet, the record player cabinet, and the wine rack. The depth of each of the cabinets is just under a third of the width of a sheet of plywood. So here I'm just breaking that down using a circular saw and a straight edge. I'll be cleaning those up a little bit more on the table saw to get them to their final dimensions, but this just lets me work with the pieces a little bit easier. The plywood is mostly 18mm birch ply, so that's 3/4 of an inch, and for most of the visible faces, those will be using a spotted gum veneer. That's an Australian eucalyptus species. For each of the shelves, those will be nestled into a dado, and to cut those I used the crosscut sled here and just made a series of cuts. This would have been easier with a router, but my router had just broken, and so I had to do this using the table saw. The only downside of this is I had to clean those grooves out with a chisel. To make sure that each of the sides was joined at a perfect right angle, I used these right angle jig clamps here to just hold everything while I was attaching them. For most of the joins, I didn't use glue, I just screwed everything together. That was in case I made any mistakes along the way, just so I could take it apart and sort of trim anything that was maybe slightly over or undersized. Didn't really run into any issues, but I just wanted to be sort of safe rather than have to try and pull glue apart. And given that most of the sides were going to be covered by other cabinets, none of this is going to be visible, so I didn't spend too long trying to make these look perfect. And for the top, I just screwed that in through the top. Again, it's not going to be seen by anyone, so it doesn't really matter if there's screws there. Now for the LED downlights, I had to drill a 14mm recess for those to sit in. So that basically is almost all the way through the plywood. The drill press that I have definitely won't support any timber that's this wide. So what I needed to do was create a drilling guide here. So I used the table saw for that, and then I just had to clamp that onto the right position. So I basically had the 55mm Forstner bit here, just pushed that through the guide, had it clamped into the right position, and then I was able to drill most of that. And then once the hole was big enough, I was able to take the guide off just to finish off the depth. And that all seemed to work pretty well. So next up, I had to put some holes for the cables to run through for the lights. So I used a small drill bit on one side and then came at it with a brad point bit from the other side. Then I had to run a channel for the cable, so I used the router for that. I had actually purchased a router at this stage, so I was playing around with a new router, which was fun. So that is a channel that will be inside the cabinet, so no one will see it. So for the LED downlights, they have a motion sensing switch which you can wave your hand in front of. And to install that, I had to drill a hole big enough to fit that into the front face of the side of a shelf. So here I made a little jig that basically just gives me a center point, and I've just drilled that down the right depth. And once that's done, I come at it from the side and put space for the cable to run through. And similar to the lights, I had to use the router here just to create a channel for the cable to run through. Didn't have a better solution for these cables that I could think of. I didn't think it was necessary to cover these up. You'll see later that all of these cables are hidden inside one of the cupboards, so they're not really seen by people unless you go looking for them. And apologies here for the mobile phone footage. I didn't capture this with the actual camera at the time. So basically this is just showing the action of turning this on and off just by waving in front of it, and also dimming it up and down by just holding your hand in front of it. Here I'm cutting down some 6mm or 1/4 inch birch plywood, and this will be used for the backing for each of the cabinets. This will all be painted unless it's inside a cupboard, so that will be painted in the same green that we saw on the first half of the wall unit build. And I just masked off halfway just so that I knew where the shelf would be, and so I'm only painting the bit that's going to be seen by people. Didn't want to waste paint painting sort of the inside of a cupboard, so I just left that. And we have the satisfying peel. I attached the backs of the cabinets using a brad nailer. These were done sort of at a slight angle in towards the sides and the top of the cabinet. That sort of helps secure it so it can't be pushed off as easily. Then also the benefit of that is I don't risk pushing through the veneer if I don't quite get it straight. Now onto the doors, once again using the spotted gum veneer birch plywood. These were done so that there would be grain matching. So I just had to cut each one in half and then make sure I kept those together and that they lined up perfectly when we were finished. So next it's onto the hinges. These doors are all going to be inset, and so that basically means that they'll sit flush with the frame, so not on top of the frame. And to get the position of those correct, I had to use the jig that was provided by the manufacturer that put the position of the holes in the exact right location. There was quite a lot of cleanup to do with some of the faces. I had some bits where I had to fill little gaps, and then there was quite a few burn marks, and as you can see, a fair bit of sanding and also planing to get those nice and smooth. But they came up looking beautiful, so really, really happy with how it all came together. Once everything was sanded, all of the spotted gum veneer faces had 2 coats of a satin hard wax oil. So that was applied using a non-abrasive Scotch-Brite pad and then cleaned off with a rag. Once I put the finish on, I was super happy with how that grain appeared. Completely changed the look of it, made it really dark and gave it a lot of character. Now I didn't record it, but I cut a hole in a back panel here that goes behind the record player so you can feed all the cables through it. Now the hinges themselves just pop into the hole, and then you get the 2 little pins that go down, and once you put the faceplate down, it locks it into position. So there's no screws or anything to worry about with these, which was really nice. To get the hinges in the right place, I made sort of a proxy fake sort of mini door, and so that had the hinges in the right position, and I used that to align the hinge plates. So those are the ones that are fixed to the cabinet, and that all went really smoothly. So by creating a shorter version of the door, I was able to fit the drill in, which I wouldn't have been able to do if I tried to do this with one of the actual doors. And I didn't film it, but I installed binding posts for speakers on the 2 side cabinets. Here I'm just test fitting one of the cabinet doors, and so that is a little bit of a pain to get on. You've got to align both hinges perfectly at the same time, and then they just snap into the hinge plates. Now I ended up with a bit of a change to my design as I went through. For the centerpiece above the record player cabinet, I had 2 really wide doors, and they were just way too wide to actually be functional. So I ended up creating this centerpiece that would be fixed, and this had some benefits in that it covered up some of the cabling that the switch and the lighting would sort of otherwise have made quite visible. Now there was a fair bit of adjusting to do on some of the hinges just to make sure that the doors were sitting in the correct position. Because they're inset, it sort of is quite obvious when they're not perfect, so you really have to tweak them sort of millimeter by millimeter as you go through it, but once you get them, they look really good. Because the doors have no handles on them, they're all push to open, so I installed these spring-loaded adjustable pushers. So you basically just push the door and it pops out so you can grab it. And that's pretty much it. So that's almost the end of the series. So be sure to stick around at the end of this video to see the actual sort of installed version of these shelves. I'll be doing a video of the actual installation as well, and I'll cover the entire build and sort of talk about any issues or learnings I had. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.